Once upon a time, at the base of the Foggy Mountains, there was a boy named Jack. He lived on a small, rundown farm with his mother. Their life wasn't just simple, it was hard. Money was always tight, and the only thing keeping them going was the milk they sold from their one and only cow, Bess. One morning, while it was still dark out and the sky hadn't even started to lighten, Jack's mother shook him awake. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. She'd clearly been crying. "Jack," she whispered urgently, "get up. I need you to take Bess to the market and sell her." Jack blinked, still half asleep. "What? Why? What's going on?" "We need money," she said, wiping her face with her apron. "The roof's caving in. The windows are broken. We don't even have a front door anymore. Winter's coming fast. If we don't fix this place before the cold sets in, we're not going to survive." Jack nodded slowly, still groggy, but understanding the weight behind her words. He threw on some clothes, grabbed a sack, and led Bess out of the barn. She mooed softly, like she knew something was up. As Jack walked toward the gate, his mother called after him. "Don't let anyone cheat you. She's worth at least 5 gold coins. Nothing less." Jack gave a nod and set off down the dirt path to town, the morning mist curling around his boots. About halfway there, as the sun just started to rise behind the hills, Jack met a strange old man on the road. The man had a long, crooked cane and a bright red scarf, even though the morning was warm. "Good morning, young man," the stranger said cheerfully. "Where are you off to with that fine cow?" Jack, still sleepy but polite, answered, "Good morning, sir. I'm going to the market to sell Bess." The old man nodded, inspecting the cow with squinty eyes. "She's a beauty, no doubt. Tell you what, I'll buy her from you, and I'll give you a very special deal." Jack perked up. "How much?" "I can't take less than 5 gold coins." "Ah," the old man said with a sigh. "I don't have gold, but I do have something better." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were 5 black beans. "These," he said, "are magic beans. They're worth more than any gold. Plant them, and you'll be richer than the richest man who's ever lived." Jack hesitated. Magic beans? That sounded like a trick. But he looked at the old man's eyes. They were calm, steady. Then he thought about his mother, and how happy she'd be if they could finally fix the house. If these beans really were magic. "All right," Jack said slowly. "Deal. You can take Bess." Jack handed over the lead rope, took the velvet pouch, and hurried home, heart racing. "I've done something amazing," he told himself. "She's going to be so happy." But when Jack burst through the door and poured the beans into his mother's hands, the reaction wasn't what he expected. She froze. Then her face turned red. "You what?" she yelled. "You sold our only cow for a handful of beans." Jack opened his mouth to explain, but she didn't give him the chance. She flung the beans out the window, turned away from him, and sat down hard in front of the fire. Jack stood there, stunned. His heart sank. He'd thought he was saving them, but now they had nothing. No cow, no food, no money, and winter was still coming. He dragged himself to his room and closed the door. All he could think was, "What have I done?" The next morning, something felt off. Jack opened his eyes and squinted toward the window. There was a strange glow in the room, a kind of green light filtering through the curtains. He got up, pulled them aside, and gasped. Outside the window, in the exact spot where his mother had thrown the beans, a gigantic beanstalk had burst through the earth. It towered into the sky, twisting and winding all the way up into the clouds. "They really are magic," Jack whispered. He glanced at the door. His mother was still asleep, so without waking her, Jack pulled on his boots, slung a bag over his shoulder, and stepped outside. "All I need is 5 gold coins," he muttered to himself. "That's all. Just enough to fix the house." Without a second thought, Jack grabbed a vine and started to climb. The beanstalk was thick and sturdy. Climbing it felt almost natural, like it wanted him to reach the top. He went higher and higher, past birds and clouds, until the air turned cool and quiet. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jack reached the top and found himself standing on a soft, misty cloud. In the distance, nestled among the clouds, was a massive stone castle. Jack's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since the day before. Maybe, just maybe, there was food in that castle. He walked up to the enormous wooden door and knocked. Knock, knock. It creaked open. A giantess stood there, at least 20 feet tall. She had kind eyes and wore a patchwork apron the size of a tent. "Hello there," Jack said, trying not to sound afraid. "I'm really hungry. Could you spare a little food?" The giantess peered down at him, surprised. "You poor thing. You look half-starved. Come in, quickly." She led him to a kitchen the size of a barn and handed him a bowl of warm vegetable stew. Jack ate greedily, barely noticing the tremors shaking the floor. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The kitchen rumbled. Cups rattled. The stew in his bowl rippled. "Oh no," the giantess whispered. "My husband is home. He hates humans. Quick, hide." She yanked open the pantry door, and Jack dove in just as the kitchen door slammed open. "Fifofum," the giant roared, stomping inside. "I smell the blood of a human." The giantess smiled sweetly. "You must be smelling the stew, darling. There's no one here." The giant grunted and sat at the table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sack, spilling it onto the table. Jack peeked through a crack in the pantry door and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gold coins. Jack's heart skipped. That was exactly what he needed. As soon as the room cleared, Jack slipped out, grabbed the coins, and stuffed them into his bag. "This is it," he whispered. "This is all I need." But just as he turned to leave, he remembered. No cow meant no milk. No milk meant no food. 5 coins wouldn't last long. And so, instead of climbing back down, Jack tiptoed through the enormous hallway of the castle, staying close to the shadows. Everything around him was huge. The chairs, the fireplace, even the candlesticks were taller than him. He kept his bag close and his eyes wide. One false step and the giants would crush him like a bug. Up ahead, the giant turned into another room. Jack followed, carefully peeking around the corner. It looked like a massive living room, with ceilings so high they vanished into the mist. Jack spotted a couch that could probably seat a dozen people. He crept behind it and ducked low, hiding beneath it just in time. From under the couch, Jack watched the giant lumber toward a cupboard. The giant pulled open the doors and reached inside. "Hello, my beautiful hen," he said in a surprisingly gentle voice. "Lay, please." To Jack's amazement, the hen blinked and calmly laid a golden egg. Jack's eyes widened. "That hen lays golden eggs?" he thought. "If I had that, I wouldn't need 5 gold coins. I could buy 50 cows, maybe even 100. The hen clucked softly and settled down, as if laying golden eggs was no big deal. The giant let out a long yawn, mumbled something to himself, and stomped off to another part of the castle. As soon as the coast was clear, Jack crawled out, tiptoed to the cupboard, and gently lifted the golden hen into his bag. The hen didn't squawk. She just tilted her head, curious but calm. "This is it," Jack whispered again. "This is definitely all I need." But of course it wasn't. As Jack turned to leave, he remembered what the old man had said, that the beans were worth more than gold, that this wasn't just a lucky find, but the key to everything. He thought about being not just rich, but the richest, not just helping his mother survive, but giving her everything she ever wanted. Jack looked back toward the hallway. Just one more room, he thought. One more treasure, and then I'm out of here for good. He followed the echo of the giant's footsteps down a long corridor until he came to a huge bedroom. The door was half open. Jack slipped in and hid under the massive bed. The room was dimly lit by a giant lantern that swung from the ceiling like a chandelier. In one corner stood something that looked like a tall harp, except it shimmered, as if made of pure gold. Jack held his breath. The giant entered, stretched, and walked over to the golden harp. "Hello, my beautiful harp," he said. "Play, please." The harp came to life on its own. Without anyone touching it, it began to play the most beautiful music Jack had ever heard, soft, slow, and a little sad, like a lullaby drifting through a dream. Jack lay frozen under the bed, entranced by the sound. "A magic harp," he whispered to himself. "If I had that harp, I'd be more than rich. I'd be famous." Eventually, the giant started to snore, his deep breaths shaking the floor. This was it, Jack's chance. He slid out from under the bed, careful not to make a sound. He crossed the room, reached up, and gently lifted the harp from its stand. But the moment he touched it, the harp shouted, "Help me, master! A human is stealing me." Jack's heart stopped. The giant woke up with a thunderous growl. His eyes snapped open and locked onto Jack, who now had a harp, a hen, and a bag of gold coins slung over his shoulder. "Thief!" The giant bellowed, lurching to his feet. The harp wiggled in Jack's arms, still crying out for help. Jack bolted. He sprinted out of the bedroom, down the hall, through the kitchen, and out the castle door, with the giant pounding after him every step of the way. "Stop! Give back my treasures." But Jack was small, and fast, and terrified. He reached the edge of the cloud, where the beanstalk waited like a giant green rope back to earth. Without hesitating, he slung the harp over one shoulder, hugged the hen to his chest, and started climbing down. The beanstalk swayed as he descended, leaves whipping past his face. Behind him, the giant appeared at the edge of the cloud and looked down. Jack glanced up. The giant was coming, but he was slow. Big hands, big feet, and a big fear of heights. The giantess's voice rang out from the castle. "Be careful, my husband. Humans can be dangerous." Jack hit the ground hard and stumbled into the yard. He looked up. The giant was halfway down the stalk, clinging on with wide, panicked eyes. Jack didn't hesitate. He ran into the shed, grabbed the old woodcutter's axe, and rushed back out. He raised the blade and started chopping. Whack! The stalk shuddered. Whack! Leaves rained down. Whack! With a final crack, the beanstalk split. The giant roared as the entire thing gave way. He tumbled through the air, arms flailing, before crashing into the distant mountains with a booming thud. For a moment, everything was still. Then a faint cry echoed through the valley. "No!" Jack stood, axe still in hand, chest heaving. He had done it. The beanstalk was gone. The giant couldn't come back. He turned and walked inside. The hen clucked softly in his bag. The harp had gone quiet, and the gold coins jingled in his pouch. He had everything he needed, maybe even more than that. The next few years were different. With the golden hen laying eggs nearly every day, Jack and his mother went from poor and desperate to rich beyond anything they'd imagined. The house was repaired and then rebuilt entirely. Brick walls, glass windows, a beautiful new roof. They bought cows, chickens, goats. They hired help. They even planted flowers. The magic harp, meanwhile, drew attention from far and wide. People came from all over just to hear it play. Jack became famous. Newspapers wrote about him. Songs were sung. His name became known far beyond the foggy mountains. He eventually married a well-known singer from the city. They had 10 children, all with wild curly hair and big imaginations. Their home was full of laughter, music, and warmth. But Jack never felt quite right. Because no matter how happy his life looked from the outside, he couldn't shake the sound of the giant's voice yelling for help. He couldn't unhear the sorrow in the harp's song, or the moment when the clouds above the beanstalk had turned gray and heavy. Every time the wind picked up, he thought he heard the giant calling for his wife. And every time it rained, he imagined. Jack couldn't escape the feeling. Even when he sat by the fire with his children on his lap, or danced to the harp's soft melodies during summer evenings, something inside him stayed heavy. It was guilt, plain and simple. At night, he'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling. Sometimes, he'd hear thunder and wonder if it wasn't thunder at all, but the giant's voice still crying out. Sometimes the rain would come down hard, and it didn't feel like water. It felt like regret. He'd remember the giantess, her kind face, her warm stew, the way she tried to protect him even though he was a stranger in her home. He hadn't just stolen from the giant. He'd destroyed their way back to each other. And now they were both stranded, one on the ground, the other in the clouds. Jack didn't talk about it. His mother, older now, enjoyed her quiet days in the garden and didn't bring up the past. His wife, lovely and kind, didn't know what he'd done to get all this. Not really. And his children, full of questions and joy, never asked where the golden hen came from. But Jack knew. Every time he held a golden egg in his hand, it felt a little colder. Eventually, the fame faded. People stopped visiting the harp. The children grew up. And Jack, older now, spent more and more time alone. One chilly autumn afternoon, he stood at the edge of his field and stared out toward the foggy mountains. The wind was strong. The sky was thick with gray clouds. Somewhere up there, hidden above the mist, was a castle. And maybe, just maybe, a heartbroken giantess still crying for her husband. Jack made a decision. He went into the house and opened the mantelpiece box. It was something he hadn't touched in decades. Inside was a single, shriveled black bean, the last of the magic beans. He turned it over in his fingers. It was lighter than he remembered. Dry, slightly cracked. He stared at it a long time. That night, he didn't sleep. By morning, he had packed a bag. He left behind a letter for his wife and children. He told them not to worry. He told them he loved them. And he told them the truth about everything. Then, with nothing but a walking stick, a cloak, and that one final bean, Jack set off toward the misty mountains. The journey was long. The wind grew colder as he climbed, and the fog grew thicker. He hiked through craggy paths and narrow ledges. He passed the place where the giant had fallen, though nothing remained now except tall grass and scattered rocks. There was no sign of the castle, no echo of that old voice. Still, Jack pressed on. He searched the mountains for days, maybe weeks. Then, in a small clearing surrounded by wildflowers and moss, Jack found the spot. The earth felt different here, like it remembered. He knelt, dug a small hole with his hands, and gently planted the last bean. Then he waited. The ground was silent. The wind blew through the trees. Nothing happened. Jack exhaled and sat back. Maybe it was too late. Maybe the bean had lost its magic. Or maybe magic only works when you're young and foolish and full of dreams. He leaned against a tree and closed his eyes. And then, a rumble. At first it sounded like thunder, but it didn't come from the sky. The earth beneath Jack's feet began to shake. The soil cracked. Roots broke through the ground like fingers reaching for the sky. In seconds, the bean had grown into a sprout, then a stalk, then a towering vine that twisted upward with impossible speed. Leaves unfurled like sails. The stalk glowed faintly in the mist, pulsing with the magic Jack thought he'd lost. It reached higher and higher until it vanished into the clouds. Jack stood, gripping his walking stick. This was it. He could go back up. He could make things right. He could say, "I'm sorry." But as he reached out to grab the beanstalk, a deep voice echoed behind him. Looking for someone? Jack turned. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the giant. He was older. His clothes were tattered. His eyes were tired, but sharp. And in his hand, he held nothing, just a simple wooden flute. Jack's mouth opened, but no words came. The giant stepped forward. "I didn't die," he said simply. "I fell. Far, but not far enough." Jack swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "You cut down the beanstalk," the giant said, voice flat. "Left me stranded." Jack dropped his stick. I thought you were going to kill me." "I was," said the giant. "You stole from me. From us." Jack looked down. "I did. For a long time." The wind said more than either of them. Then Jack lifted his head. "I didn't come to fight. Or run. I came to say I'm sorry. I was young. Stupid. Greedy." The giant said nothing. "I want to fix it," Jack added. "There's a new beanstalk now. You can go home." Still, the giant didn't speak. Finally, he turned his head toward the clouds. "Home." Jack followed his gaze. The beanstalk shimmered, swaying slightly. The top was lost in the fog, just like before. "If you go," Jack said quietly, "you might find her again." The giant's jaw clenched. His eyes grew misty. "I've heard her voice in the rain," he said. "For years." Jack nodded. "So have I." They stood there, two old men, one giant, one human. Both changed, both carrying the past. The harp, the hen, the gold. None of it mattered now. All that mattered was a chance to make something right. "I'll go up with you," Jack offered. The giant looked at him, surprised. "To explain," Jack added. "To her." The giant stared at him a moment longer, then nodded. Side by side, they approached the stalk. The leaves were slick. They climbed slowly, carefully. The beanstalk swayed with the wind, its thick vines curling like ropes through the fog. Jack's hands ached as he pulled himself higher. His legs trembled, not just from the climb, but from age, from fear, from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The giant, despite his size, moved gracefully. He was quiet, focused. Jack couldn't tell what he was thinking, but something had changed in him. He wasn't angry, not anymore. Just tired, like someone walking towards something they've waited a lifetime to face. Clouds wrapped around them like misty veils. The world below disappeared. All that remained was up. Then, at last, they broke through. Above the clouds, the sky was soft and golden. The sun glowed gently behind the vapor. It was peaceful up there, almost sacred. And in the distance, rising from the mist, was the castle. It looked older now, weathered. Ivy clung to the stone. Some of the towers had crumbled. The grand front door hung crookedly on one hinge. Jack paused. The last time he saw this place, he was running for his life. Now, he was walking back in with nothing to take, only something to give. The giant stepped forward first. His feet pressed deep into the mossy ground. He didn't hesitate. Not once. Jack followed. The castle doors creaked as they opened. The echo rolled through the great hall like a memory returning. Everything inside was quiet. Dust floated in the light beams cutting through shattered windows. The grand tapestries had faded. The once polished floors were cracked and dull. And yet, something about it still felt alive. They stepped into the kitchen. The long table was still there. The enormous wooden bowls, the iron pot in the hearth, the oversized spoon resting where it had always rested. Jack blinked. For a moment, he saw her, Mrs. Giant, moving around the kitchen, humming to herself, smiling as she stirred stew. But she wasn't there. The giant moved to the pantry. Jack stood silently behind him, heart pounding. "She's not here," the giant said softly. "Maybe she's somewhere else," Jack offered. The giant turned slowly. His eyes scanned the room. "No, she's not here." They searched the castle together, room by room. The dining hall, the living room where Jack had hidden under the couch, the bedroom where the harp had once played itself to sleep. All empty. At last, they came to the tower. The harp was there. Dusty, yes, but still beautiful, still golden. Jack ran his hand along its frame. "Hello, old friend," he whispered. The harp didn't respond. The giant touched it gently, then walked past it toward the tower's open window. The wind blew softly. He looked out. Jack stood beside him. "She waited," the giant said at last. "I know she did." Jack nodded. "She did." The giant closed his eyes. "But she's gone now." A silence fell between them. Jack wanted to say something, anything. But what could you say when someone loses their world? So he didn't speak. He simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder with the giant. And then, from the tower stairs, came a faint sound. Footsteps. Jack's heart leapt. He turned. There, at the top of the stairs, stood the giantess. She looked older. Her hair had silvered. Her gown was faded. But her eyes, those kind eyes, were still the same. She froze. Her eyes locked on Jack, then the giant. Slowly, she stepped forward. Her hand went to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "Is it?" she whispered. The giant took one step toward her. "It's me," he said. "I'm home." She let out a sound, part sob, part laugh, and rushed into his arms. They embraced like no time had passed at all. Jack stepped back, watching them. It felt like the castle itself exhaled, like it had been holding its breath all these years. They stood there a long time. Finally, the giantess turned to Jack. Her eyes were red, but her smile was warm. "You brought him back," she said. Jack lowered his eyes. "I owed you both more than I can ever repay." She stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You came back. That's what matters." The harp strummed softly behind them. A gentle tune, like a lullaby from long ago. The castle was no longer silent. The giants invited Jack to stay for dinner. This time, he sat at the table, not hiding, not stealing, just eating stew from a giant-sized bowl with two old friends. They talked late into the night, about the years that had passed, about their lives, their losses, their joys. The golden hen came up, and the harp, and the foolishness of youth. No one scolded. No one judged. It was just healing. Eventually, Jack stood. "I should go," he said. "My family's waiting." The giant nodded. "You'll always have a place here, if you ever want to return." Jack smiled. "Thank you." The giantess wrapped him in a hug so big he could barely breathe. Then the climb down was quiet. Jack moved slowly, one hand over the other, descending through the thick, twisting vines of the beanstalk. The wind brushed past him, cool and steady. It smelled like rain and something ancient, like the earth remembering. As he got lower, the clouds thinned and gave way to the sky. Then, the world below came back into view. The valley, the fields, the hills beyond. His mother's house, now older and weathered, tucked in the shadow of the foggy mountains. When Jack reached the ground, he stood for a moment, staring up at the massive stalk. It shimmered slightly in the early morning light, a living ladder between two worlds. He touched the base gently. "You've done enough," he whispered. Then, for the second time in his life, he picked up an axe. But this time, he didn't swing it. He paused. The memory of that first fall, of the crashing, of the thunder, of the giant tumbling from the sky, was still sharp. But now he knew better. The beanstalk wasn't a threat. It wasn't danger. It was a doorway, a link, and some doors you don't close. Instead, Jack walked back toward his house. Everything felt smaller than he remembered. The path that once seemed long now felt like a short walk. The fences, the garden, the crooked porch, frozen in time, untouched by the magic that had ruled his life above the clouds. He opened the creaky door. Inside, the fireplace had long gone cold. Dust lay thick on the mantel. A few photos lined the walls. His mother, young and strong. Jack as a boy, awkward and smiling. The golden hen was gone. The harp, too. He had left that life behind. Let it go. He poured himself some water, sat down in the wooden chair by the hearth, and closed his eyes. And he cried. Not because he was sad. Not really. He cried for everything he had seen. For the years that had passed. For his mother, long gone now. For the young boy who'd once believed that magic beans could fix everything. For the old man at the market. For the giant, and the giantess, and the castle in the sky that waited faithfully through time and memory. He cried until he fell asleep in the chair. When Jack woke up, the sun had moved across the sky. Outside, birds sang in the trees. The wind moved through the leaves like whispered stories. He stood slowly. His body was stiff, but his mind felt light. Jack walked out into the garden. There, in the far corner, was a tiny patch of freshly disturbed soil, and in the center of it, a small green sprout. He knelt beside it. It wasn't from the magic bean. He was sure of that. It was something else. Something natural. Just a simple plant growing where there used to be stone. But it still felt magical. He smiled. The days that followed were simple. Jack worked in the garden, repaired the broken windows, fixed the roof with what little strength he had left. Not because he needed to, but because it felt right. Every evening, he'd sit outside and look up at the clouds. Sometimes, if the sky was just right, he swore he could see the outline of the castle, a soft shape among the stars. He never climbed the beanstalk again, but he didn't need to. The giants lived on. He knew that. Somewhere above, they danced, laughed, held each other like the years had never touched them. And Jack, he lived quietly. One day, a traveler passed through the valley. A young woman with a large pack and curious eyes. She saw the old man tending to his garden and asked him for a place to rest. Jack welcomed her, gave her water, shared some bread. As they sat on the porch, she looked toward the towering beanstalk stretching up into the sky. "That's incredible," she whispered. "What is it?" Jack smiled. That's a story. A true one." He thought about it for a moment. "True enough," he said. She laughed. "Tell me." So he did. Not everything. Not at first. Just bits and pieces. A cow named Bess. A handful of black beans. A castle in the clouds. A hen that laid golden eggs. A harp that sang. She listened closely, eyes wide, like a child hearing bedtime tales. When he finished, she sat in silence for a while. "Did it really happen?" she asked. Jack looked at her, then at the beanstalk, then at the clouds. "Some things," he said, "don't need to be proven to be real." The traveler stayed one more night before heading on her way. But she left with something Jack hadn't expected, a notebook filled with sketches, drawings of giants and castles and vines that reached the sky. And at the bottom of one page, written in careful letters, "Stories don't have to end. They just need to be remembered." Jack kept the notebook. Years passed. The garden grew wild again. The house faded into the hills. The beanstalk, untouched and unchanged, still climbed endlessly toward the sky. And people still came. Travelers, wanderers, children with questions, poets, dreamers. They all found their way to the valley at the foot of the foggy mountains. Not because they believed in fairy tales, but because something in... As the seasons passed, Jack became something of a myth himself. The old man with a story and a beanstalk. The one who lived at the edge of the foggy mountains, near the clouds. Some folks said he was mad. Others said he was wise. Children whispered that he had once stolen gold from a giant, and the clouds had never forgiven him. Jack didn't mind the rumors. He welcomed them. A story, after all, was like a seed. Scatter it right, and it would grow. One crisp morning, long after Jack had given up waiting for the giant's voice to call down from the clouds, something unexpected happened. There was a knock on the door. Not the wind, not a branch. A deliberate, gentle knock. Jack opened the door slowly. Standing on the porch was a boy, barely taller than the watering can next to him. His coat was too big, his boots were muddy, and his face was streaked with tears. "Hello," the boy said, voice small but steady. Jack knelt down. "Well, hello there. What brings you all the way up here?" "I heard there was a ladder to the clouds," said the boy, "and someone who knows how to climb it." Jack looked past him to the beanstalk. It shimmered in the sunlight, green and strong as ever. "Where are your parents?" Jack asked gently. The boy lowered his eyes. "Don't have any. Not anymore." There was silence for a moment. The kind that's thick and soft, like a blanket you didn't ask for but need anyway. Jack stood. "Well then," he said, "I guess we better get you some breakfast." He fed the boy, let him wash up, found him a clean shirt that hung off his shoulders like sails on a tiny ship. And that night, Jack told him a story. Not the whole story, just the beginning. About a cow named Bess. About beans that weren't just beans. About climbing higher than fear. The boy listened the way people listen when they're hoping something beautiful might be true. When the story ended, the boy sat in silence. Then he asked, "Did you ever go back?" Jack looked out the window. "No," he said. "Not yet." "Why not?" Jack didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the stars. "Because I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." The boy was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Maybe you should go now? I think they miss you." Jack smiled. "Maybe they do." That night, long after the boy had fallen asleep, Jack took out the last magic bean from the wooden box on his mantle. It was dry and wrinkled now, like a memory that's almost faded. He rolled it between his fingers. Then he looked out at the beanstalk. He didn't need to plant this one. The way up was already there. But still it felt like the right time. So, just before dawn, Jack walked out into the field. The earth was soft. The morning dew kissed his hands. He knelt and pressed the last bean into the soil. A small gesture, a quiet goodbye, or maybe a hello. He stood, wiped his hands, and turned to the beanstalk. Then, without a word, he began to climb. The boy woke up just in time to see Jack's figure disappearing into the clouds. He ran to the base of the stalk and looked up. The morning sun turned the sky gold and silver, and the beanstalk shimmered like a ribbon pulled tight across the horizon. "Good luck," the boy whispered. "Say hi to the giants." Jack climbed for what felt like hours. He moved slowly, savoring every twist of the vine, every breath of air that thinned with altitude. The wind wrapped around him like an old friend. And as he rose above the last layer of cloud, he saw it. The castle, still there, just as he remembered it. Ancient and massive, guarded by time. He stepped onto the soft cloud ground and looked around. There was no sound, no rumbling footsteps, no harp music, just silence. Jack made his way to the castle door, the same one he'd once knocked on as a hungry boy. This time, he didn't knock. He just stepped inside. The halls were the same. The great fireplace, now cold. The cupboards. The giant's chair, empty. The golden harp stood in the corner, strings quiet. The hen was perched in a nest by the window, eyes closed, dreaming golden dreams. Jack walked through the castle slowly, letting memory flood back. Then, in the far room, the one with the high window and stone walls, he found something that made him stop. A painting. Two giants, standing side by side. And beneath the painting, a bed. Massive, but empty, except for a folded note. Jack reached up and took it gently. The writing was careful, elegant. The ink old, but not faded. It said, "You took from us once, but we watched you grow. You are not the boy who stole. You are the man who returned. If you read this, we are not home, but we are not far. Look for us in the thunder, in the storm. We are dancing." Jack read it twice, then a third time. Then he smiled. A long, slow, content smile. He folded the note and placed it in his coat pocket. Then he sat by the window and waited, not because he was lost, but because he knew, somewhere in the next cloud over. Jack didn't wait long. By the time the second morning sun rose above the cloud line, something in the air began to shift. It wasn't loud. No thunder. No stomping. Just a rhythm. A pulse. Faint at first, like a heartbeat far away. Then closer. Steadier. Jack rose from the chair by the window. He stepped outside, out onto the balcony of the giant's castle. The air was thick with mist, and the clouds churned like they were alive. And then he heard it. Laughter. Low, rolling, like thunder in a dream. Then footsteps, soft, careful ones, not the crashing stomp he remembered. And out from the mist walked the last thing he expected. It wasn't the giant. It was Mrs. Giant. She hadn't aged a day. Her eyes were the same kind brown, her smile as gentle as he remembered it. Jack froze. She didn't speak, just walked toward him, slow and certain, until she stood before him, towering and serene. And then she knelt. That's when Jack's breath caught. He'd once been a thief in her home, a frightened boy who'd snuck away with gold and left grief in his place. And yet here she was, on one knee, like he was the one who needed forgiving. But before he could say a word, she spoke. "You came back." Jack opened his mouth, but his throat closed. He nodded. "You climbed back up," she said, "after all these years. With no tricks, no greed, just hope." Jack whispered, "I wanted to say I was sorry." Mrs. Giant smiled. "And I wanted to say thank you." He blinked. "Thank you. You reminded me that not all humans are cruel. You climbed down with treasure, but you climbed back with truth." She stood again, towering over him, but her presence was comforting now, like a warm fire on a cold day. "You're not the only one who's changed," she said. "We've changed too." Jack dared a question. "Where is he?" "The giant." Mrs. Giant turned and pointed toward the horizon. Beyond the floating hills of cloud, past the glistening peaks of mist, stood a massive tree, taller than the beanstalk itself, with branches like arms stretched toward the sky. "He's there," she said, "guarding something new." "What is it?" Jack asked. She looked at him carefully. "A seed," she said. "Not like the others. Something older. Something that doesn't grow gold, or eggs, or music, but something more powerful." Jack tilted his head. "More powerful than gold?" "Yes," she said. "It grows stories." Jack blinked. "Stories?" Mrs. Giant smiled again. "Would you like to see?" And with that, the clouds beneath them formed a gentle path. She extended her hand, and Jack, still unsure if he was dreaming or awake, took it. They walked through the sky, past floating ponds that shimmered with moonlight, past birds the size of oxen, gliding slow and silent, past trees that whispered when you looked at them, until they reached the great tree. And Jack saw him, the giant, older now, his beard longer, his shoulders broad as ever, but his face was calm, not angry, not bitter, peaceful. The giant was humming something, a tune Jack didn't know, but somehow remembered. Jack stepped forward. The giant noticed him. He stood slowly. Jack swallowed hard. "Hello." The giant didn't speak. Not yet. Just looked at Jack. Studied him. Then he said, "You brought my harp home." Jack nodded. "And my hen," the giant added. "She laid nothing but feathers for years after you left. But the day you climbed back up, she started laying gold again." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Jack said softly. "I know," the giant replied. "You were a child, and I was not kind to children." There was silence, but it wasn't heavy. It was healing. Then the giant stepped aside. "Come see what we've been growing." Jack followed him beneath the massive branches of the tree. There, nestled between roots as thick as riverbanks, was a glowing pod. Inside it, flickering like fireflies, were shapes, moving pictures, scenes from a dozen different lives. A girl chasing the moon, a boy talking to animals, a traveler climbing a mountain made of books. Jack watched, awestruck. "What is this?" he asked. "A story tree," said the giant. "Every time someone learns from their mistakes, every time they return to make things right, a new story grows here." Jack was silent. Mrs. Giant stepped up beside him. "You planted this one." Jack felt tears in his eyes. "I didn't know stories could grow," he whispered. "They can," the giant said, "but only when someone's brave enough to live them." Jack smiled, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a memory. Jack spent the night beneath the branches of the story tree. There was no roof, no bed, just clouds drifting through the roots like lazy streams. The harp played somewhere in the distance, a soft lullaby on strings that moved without touch. And the hen? She'd roost nearby, feathers shimmering gold, cooing gently as if she'd never lived anywhere else. He dreamed, but not like before. No chases, no falling, no beanstalks crashing down. He dreamed of a house with a roof that didn't leak, of his mother laughing in the sunlight, of children with sticky hands and loud questions, running through fields that never ended. And when he woke, he didn't feel older. He felt lighter. As the morning sun pushed through the clouds, painting everything in hues of rose and silver, Jack rose to find the giants waiting. Mrs. Giant held out a cup, steam curling from something that smelled like cinnamon and bread. He took it with thanks. The giant, now sitting with legs crossed like a mountain folding itself inward, motioned for Jack to join them. "What happens now?" Jack asked. The giant shrugged. "That depends." "On what?" "On what kind of ending you want." Jack sipped his drink. "Do I get to choose?" "You always did," said Mrs. Giant. And Jack thought about it. He could go home, of course, back down the beanstalk, or whatever path they might open for him. He could take the hen, the harp, the gold, again. He could rebuild the house 10 times over, feed his family for generations. But he knew what that felt like. He'd lived that ending before. He glanced up at the glowing pod nestled between the roots of the story tree. A new flicker was forming inside. A boy and 2 giants. A tree older than time. Jack leaned forward. "What if," he said slowly, "what if we grew more of these?" The giant raised an eyebrow. "More trees. More stories," Jack said. "I mean, how many people out there never get a second chance? What if we gave them one?" Mrs. Giant smiled like someone seeing a sunrise after too many years of rain. "You want to bring people here?" Jack shook his head. "No, I want to bring this out there." There was a long silence. And then the harp, as if understanding something bigger than anyone else, began to play a tune Jack had never heard before. Soft, hopeful, bold. The giant stood. He walked to the tree, placed one massive hand on its bark, and closed his eyes. A pulse echoed through the clouds. And before Jack could ask what was happening, roots started to glow, golden and silver and blue. The light moved like water through the sky, splitting into tendrils, then branching into lines that vanished into the horizon. "They'll grow," the giant whispered, "wherever they're needed." Jack looked out over the cloudlands. "They'll find the people who need them." "They always do," Mrs. Giant said. Jack felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time, the riches didn't matter. The house, the roof, even the cow, they weren't the story anymore. This was helping people rewrite the parts of their life they thought were final. Jack spent 3 more days with the giants. They told him stories of what happened after he'd cut down the first beanstalk, how the sky grew quiet for years, how the harp stopped playing, how the hen went silent, how Mrs. Giant wandered the cloudlands, searching for pieces of old magic, and how the giant had built this tree from a single forgotten seed, one that had fallen from Jack's bag on the day he ran from the castle. "It wasn't just you," the giant had said. "This was always bigger than one story." On the 4th day, Jack was ready. He stood at the edge of the cloud path, backpack on, magic bean in his pocket, the last one he'd saved, now glowing softly with new energy. "You sure you're ready for the world again?" Mrs. Giant asked with a wink. Jack nodded. "The world's not ready for me." She laughed and hugged him, a hug that wrapped around him like a blanket made of mountains and mist. The giant simply said, "Go plant something good." Jack grinned and stepped forward. As he walked back toward the edge of the clouds, a path of mist parted ahead of him. The beanstalk was gone, but something else had grown, a wide bridge of light and root, pulsing gently beneath his feet. Jack didn't look back. He didn't need to, because this time, he wasn't running away from the giants. He was walking into the world with them, to tell new stories, to give old ones a better. Back on the ground, things were not quite as Jack had left them. The fields had overgrown, swallowing up the old footpaths. His house leaned a little farther than before, like it was sighing from the weight of time. The windows were still broken, the roof still leaky. But now, none of it looked hopeless, because Jack returned with something else. Not treasure, not magic, not even the golden hen. He came back with understanding. His mother, old now, sat on the porch with a thick shawl over her shoulders. She blinked in disbelief when she saw him walking up the path, boots covered in mist, eyes filled with stories. "Jack?" she said, as if saying his name out loud would make him vanish. He dropped his bag and hugged her like he hadn't done since he was a boy. "I came back," he whispered. "For good this time." They sat together in the fading sun, sipping tea that tasted like memory. Jack didn't tell her everything, not at first. Some stories aren't meant to be told in a single sitting. But he promised he would, one by one. In the evenings, he'd walk to the edge of the farm and dig. Not aimlessly, like someone desperate to find gold. Purposefully, he planted the last bean, not out of greed, but out of belief that something beautiful could grow, even in a world that had been broken. And in the days that followed, something did. But it wasn't a beanstalk. Not like before. This time, the sprout that emerged was quiet, delicate, and luminous. It grew with the rhythm of the earth, not in a rush to reach the sky. Its leaves shimmered like silver parchment, each one curling into the shape of a sleeping thought. It didn't grow tall, it grew deep. Its roots sank into the ground like they belonged there, like they were healing something forgotten beneath the soil. Jack called it the story tree. He built a bench beside it. Neighbors stopped by to look. Some scoffed. Others sat, touched the leaves, and left with a strange look in their eyes, like they remembered something they hadn't thought about in years. Word spread. People began showing up from nearby villages, then farther out. They didn't come for gold or magic. They came to talk, to sit in the quiet glow of the tree, to remember things they'd buried, to imagine new endings. Jack listened to every story. He never interrupted. Sometimes he'd speak. Sometimes he'd just nod. But he always ended with the same words. What if that wasn't the end? And somehow it never was. One night, as Jack sat beneath the tree, fingers tracing patterns in the soil, a child approached. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her hair was tangled, her coat too big. She had the cautious look of someone who didn't know if she belonged anywhere. "Is this the place where sad stories go?" she asked. Jack smiled. "It's the place where they change." The girl sat beside him. She pulled something from her pocket, a little wooden bird, cracked and missing a wing. "My papa made it," she said. Before he left, Jack nodded, slowly. "Want to plant it?" She blinked. "But it's not a seed. Some things don't start that way." They dug a small hole, laid the bird gently inside, and covered it with soil. The story tree shivered. A leaf fell, spiraled in the air, and landed in the girl's lap. She picked it up and smiled, even though her eyes were watering. "You think it'll grow?" she asked. Jack looked up at the sky, where the clouds still carried the hush of giants. "It already is." He didn't need the hen, or the harp, or a bag of gold. He had something better now. A legacy not built on riches or fame, but on change. On choosing to rewrite the story after the first ending. On showing others they could too. As the seasons turned, more story trees sprouted. Not just here, but everywhere. People who had visited Jack's farm went home with pockets full of courage and hearts full of seeds. No 2 trees looked the same. Some glowed. Some whispered. Some bore fruit. Some bore silence. All of them offered something lost. Hope. Years passed. Jack grew older. The farm grew smaller in his eyes, even as the world grew wider with roots and branches and endless new tales. And one day, when his hair had gone silver and his hands carried the softness of time, Jack sat beneath his original tree, watching the wind ripple through its light. He felt a familiar rumble. The clouds above stirred. Thunder murmured like laughter. The wind bent low, carrying a single sound. Jack stood up, slowly, using the tree trunk for balance. He looked toward the sky and smiled. It had been years since he last heard that sound. The harp's melody, distant yet clear, woven into the breath of the clouds. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just listened, like he used to listen beneath his mother's roof, during storms that rattled the shutters and made the wind whisper secrets. He wasn't sure how long he stood there before the clouds parted, not with lightning or a crack of thunder, but with silence, a stillness so wide, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. And then, from the farthest edge of the sky, Jack saw something falling. Not falling, floating. A feather, long and shimmering, gliding down like it had traveled through every season to reach him. It landed at his feet and dissolved into the soil. Moments later, another leaf dropped from the story tree. This one glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jack picked it up. On its surface, in fine golden threads, were the words, "I forgive you." He clutched the leaf to his chest. His throat tightened. He sat back down on the bench, eyes closed, letting the memory of that voice fill him. It was the giant's voice. Softer now. No longer angry. No longer booming with betrayal. Just kind. Weathered. Human, even. Jack opened his eyes. There, at the base of the tree, was a sprout. Not like the others. It pulsed faintly with a blue light and curved upward, not toward the clouds, but in a spiral, like it was reaching for something more than the sky. He knew what it meant. The final bean had taken root. But not just in the soil, in him, in his choices, in the story he'd chosen to rewrite. Jack didn't need to climb this beanstalk. He had already bridged the sky. Elsewhere, under a rainless storm, the giant's castle still stood. Empty, but not abandoned. The harp played lullabies for no one. The golden hen clucked softly in the courtyard. The halls echoed only with time. Until one day, a second voice joined the first. Mrs. Giant. The giants were together again. No longer towering over humans, but existing alongside them. In myth, in story, in storm clouds, and spring rain. Some say they dance. Some say they sleep wrapped in fog, their dreams drifting down as mist. Some say they still wait, watching the world, hoping humans will stop chasing gold and start planting stories. As for Jack, he didn't grow richer. He grew quieter. He spent the rest of his days beside the tree, offering no advice, just space and time, and one gentle question to anyone who sat down. What do you want your ending to be? And always, without fail, someone would answer. In a whisper, in tears, in laughter, the story tree would bloom a little more. And Jack would nod. On the day Jack died, the clouds rolled in, low, dark, and gentle. Rain fell, warm and steady. Not a storm, not sorrow, a lullaby. People gathered from everywhere. Children, now grown, returned with their own children. Travelers came from villages Jack had never visited. Everyone brought something small, a drawing, a poem, a carved stone, a feather, and placed it at the base of the tree. The story tree didn't mourn. It glowed. It pulsed with light, as if saying thank you. And then, without warning, it dropped one final leaf. On it was written, "The end is only the middle," whispered kindly. The wind picked up. It carried Jack's story across the valleys and over mountaintops, into fireplaces and bedtime rituals, into classrooms and whispered tales around campfires. No one remembered exactly how it went, but they remembered how it felt. And so Jack's story lived on. Not because he climbed a beanstalk, not because he stole treasure, but because, when it mattered